digital material sourcing. And these are my three guests. You can see them already in the little window. They're all there. And I'm going to give a quick introduction to what we do at the Future Fabrics Expo. And then we head over to my guests and they can quickly talk about themselves, and then we'll have a conversation. So please remember though, to use the Q&A icons at the bottom of the screen on Zoom, so you can type in any questions. They will be fielded by my wonderful team and we will answer them in the Q&A at the end. So please use that function. So what we do at the Future Fabrics Expo, for those of you who don't know us yet, we are the largest dedicated showcase of sustainable materials for fashion. And we've been doing this since 2010. And we showcase materials with a lower environmental impact. It is all with a lot of background information displayed in the Future Fabrics Expo. And a lot of you who have been to our wonderful expos over the years would remember this, the 9th one in January. We had about 3,000 visitors and showed over, I think, 7,000 materials. And it was a wonderful expo back in January before COVID-19. So we look back at these images with a heavy heart to think that this was such a great showcase, and it will be a while maybe until we can do something like this again. So until then, we're digital and virtual. And you can see here our four main sort of guiding principles. So diversify as in diversifying the fiber basket, innovate in terms of really trying to work with materials that are safe and renewable. And of course, when it comes to mainly agricultural fibers from that are cultivated, we're very much promoting anything that is restorative and regenerative. And so a quick introduction to Tiffany Chen, who is the CEO and founder of TECHSTYLE. She's already there up on the mountain in Switzerland, I believe. And she has founded the TECHSTYLE, which is the digital marketplace dedicated to sustainable materials sourcing. And what you can see here is basically the Future Fabrics Virtual Expo, which is now partnering with TECHSTYLE. And what we've done is we actually launched this at the 9th Expo back in January, which is basically our digital home, so to say. The Future Fabrics Virtual Expo is a discovery platform, and it shows a selection of materials that we usually have in the physical showcase. And it has a lot of background information and sustainability information about the material itself. And then we have teamed up with Tiffany and her platform to give certain materials, and I go here with my cursor, where on the particular material, you can see a buy button, and it means you can click on that and go straight on to Tiffany's platform, which means you can actually then purchase the material itself. And so this is a wonderful partnership that makes it easier, hopefully, for the brands who are sourcing, especially in the days where physical trade fairs can't really take place. And this is Tiffany's platform down here, as you can see, the same material. And so look out when you go onto the Digital Expo and see for the buy button up here, which links you straight on to Tiffany's. And then I am going to go on to Pedro's video from ZILVER, introducing his brand. And after that, I'll hand over to Pedro and then on to Tiffany, and we can have a conversation following up from that. So you'll see a video coming shortly.
My name is Pedro Lourenço. I'm the founder and creative director of ZILVER. I was born and raised in Brazil. My parents are both fashion designers. I was always encouraged by my parents to express myself creatively. I spent my childhood experimenting, doing shows in my house, sketching, doing pattern cutting lessons. I was exposed to fashion since such an early age that I didn't have the time to think I wanted to be something else. I'm very persuasive, basically invaded my mother's office and studio and started like making clothes and show to her to convince her to hire me. So at the age of 12, I did my first show professionally in São Paulo Fashion Week. At the show, we had like some of the coolest models in Brazil at the time, Raquel Zimmerman, Carol Trentini. It was really fun. I was so young and I always remember this phrase from Picasso that it took him his whole life to have the freedom of a kid. And I think for myself, having the opportunity to start working such an early age, I always came back to that freedom. And I think my biggest challenge maturing and growing is actually to go back and to play and to express myself as a kid. When I was 19, I did my first show in Paris during Fashion Week. And when I moved to London, I took over the creative direction of Italian brand. I think the 20s is a very interesting period when you start getting more in touch with who you are and what you like. I think growing up in fashion, always exposed to this industry, I started to feel uncomfortable with not knowing the origins and the background of the decisions I was making, both as a consumer and also as a designer. And I started feeling quite empty on just expressing myself creatively. I felt like my generation had a call. Resources have a limit and we couldn't keep structuring without responsibility. We need to create a balance and find a responsible way of creating economy. Of course, being a designer, you're always interested in newness. So for me, it was interesting the idea of a challenge to break the stigma of sustainability being something unsexy and to show that, of course, it's possible to make clothes that are desirable and sexy, but still responsible. I wanted to challenge myself and come up with a brand born with a responsible mindset, but still sharp in the design and aesthetics. We wanted to be as transparent as possible with the consumer, to share all information of our products and materials, and to actually also get input and get knowledge as well from the consumer. I love the color silver because silver for me is reflective. I wanted to create a brand that was about a reflection of the time and a mindset that was in constant development. What I envision for ZILVER is the idea of a future-proof wardrobe. Future-proof is the idea of anticipating the future and developing ways of producing and consuming that minimize stress on the planet. I feel this mindset should be the norm and should be the approach to move forward in all industries. When it comes to sustainability, it's important to know that's an ongoing process. It's impossible to take decisions without making compromises. That's why we put a lot of effort in being as transparent and responsible as possible. I've realized with time that technology is the best solution when it comes to waste reduction. I've been developing a creative process, which starts in the computer. I make sure everything is very defined in the computer and I have very, very clear vision of the look. And to brief the pattern cutter, I actually print the sketch in real size and I place in the dummy with the real proportions that I want to be able to see already before and to be as efficient as possible in the process to reduce waste. An element that's always at the core of my creative process at ZILVER is astrology. Each collection, we follow the order of the zodiac and bring all those different archetypes of personality as a starting point to create a mood for the collection. Still keeping the identity of ZILVER. If I could use a word to describe ZILVER's aesthetic, it would be liminal. Liminal is occupying a position at or on both sides of a boundary or edge. I think I do carry a lot of Brazilian references, and I've been very inspired by modernist architects from Brazil, Oscar Niemeyer, Paulo Mendes da Rocha. Of course, growing up with my mother that's obsessed with sci-fi movies and space and this universe, I do get very excited when I create a look that looks sci-fi, that looks like from the future. In terms of design, I think there's a lot of inspiration that we can get from nature, not only in form, but also in function. I do think we really need to respect and celebrate nature, protect it, and also get inspired by it. We need to understand that only together this change will have a big impact in the world.
Okay. I'm going to go on to stop sharing. Is that right? Can you all see me and hear me?
Yeah.
Good.
Yeah,
okay.
Perfectly.
Fantastic movie. So Pedro, I think we're going to quickly let you say a few more words if you want about your brand, and then we'll give Tiffany the chance to introduce herself. But before we do that, can I ask you, what is the fabric that your fabulous jacket was made of in that movie?
Oh, this is interesting.
So good.
Yeah. Well, in the beginning, when I came up with the name ZILVER, I thought that it would be like the biggest challenge to find a material in silver that would be responsible. So we made a huge research, and this is from Eco Alf.
Yeah.
And it's recycled nylon, and then has this treatment on top of it that's reflective. But,
okay.
but much less chemicals than other companies does. So it's interesting.
Okay. Fabulous. Okay, well, listen, this was a really great movie, and I think everyone gets a bit of a feel for who you are and your brand. But tell us a bit more about your Future for brand.
Sure. So ZILVER was launched in 2018. I've been working the project for 3 years after I left La Perla, the Android brand. And my interest in ZILVER, I'm actually in a liminal position because I was raised growing up with my parents, and they are designers, so I've been always in touch with fashion, and also with the good and the bad sides of fashion, with kind of the whole old world values of a generation that didn't have knowledge and didn't have awareness of the impact of their decisions in the environment, or maybe didn't listen to the scientists that was already talking about it, but also with this kind of old world about techniques and about like construction and really developing a garment deeply. So I wanted to use this knowledge and just construct this old side that for me was not interesting anymore. And I started like questioning myself, why am I not knowing more about the products I'm buying? Why does I don't know where's the origins, what is the background of the decisions I'm making as a consumer? So I started like researching a lot about sustainability. Camila, that works with me in the sustainability, she was involved in this process. So when we started kind of to build the brand, was 2 years of work and research. And then also was then that I started to understand that there is no formula, there is no right or wrong. There is actions that can be made, and there is a lot can be made that's not being taken seriously by the industry. But there is no right or wrong. There is always a different angle and a different way to see. And so I started realizing that was very important. That was a conversation that was not only about the brand, and was not only about the industry, not only about the consumer, but I think all the different industries and the whole. Everyone together to think about and to share and be transparent and honest about where we are in this process. So I decided that the first step for this, it was to sharing all information of the products in the label. So you can kind of like when you go to the supermarket and you can find like an organic product, and you know that this is organic and why, and then there's a certification. And I thought that was the first step. And of course, we started now to understand more that we are interested in creating future-proof habits. So it's not only about clothes. I'm personally, in my personal life, I'm getting very interested in idea of the coffee. Where do I buy from? How is it, if it's a compostable coffee? And then also, what's the perfect water filter and this stuff? And we want to involve this also a bit more in ZILVER, and kind of like promote and kind of like together think about more ways of kind of like keep generating economy in a way that's responsible.
Okay, thank you. We'll come to a lot of these points that you've just touched on. Tiffany, can you hear us up on the mountain?
Can you hear me?
We can hear you now, yes. If you could say just a couple of words about TECHSTYLE and how you got into this and so on.
Yes, sure. Well, first of all, really, really honored to be speaking amongst this panel together with our partner, but also such an inspirational brand like ZILVER. In some respects, like I come from a very different background to Pedro, but we also share a lot of commonality. I spent 5 years of my professional life working in finance, but actually my parents have been in the garment industry for more than 30 years. So in some sense, I kind of grew up in the garment factory, and at some point I realized how much waste was being produced. Like millions of meters of fabric that are wasted, whether it's because of canceled orders or defects. And I was looking also for a greater purpose in life. I realized, hey, there is such a big issue in fashion industry, and I kind of feel personally responsible since my parents, they've been involved in this, they've been beneficiary of the rise of fast fashion, but obviously also a direct contributor. And that's why, that's what really inspired me to start TECHSTYLE, which is obviously the B2B marketplace for sourcing sustainable fabric. And why a platform for sourcing? Because I truly believe to change the fashion industry and help it to become more sustainable, everything starts from the product. You know, it's precisely about choosing the right material that goes into fashion pieces. So, you know, my vision for textile is not only to catalyze sustainability in the fashion supply chain, but also really empower designers like Pedro to have the right knowledge and information on the fabric, and also give them very, very easy access to this information, so that, you know, we can really enable designers to create beautiful products that are made consciously, you know, respecting the
Right.
environment.
So maybe if we could, oh, I think the line is a bit funny.
That's a little bit of the background.
Okay, thank you, Tiffany. Maybe we can just drill down a bit here. When you're talking about the challenges, et cetera, perhaps, Pedro, if you can say a little bit what challenges you have encountered and how you've, you know, sort of overcome them. And of course, that also is the connection with Tiffany then. And also, if I may say very proudly, you've come to the Future Fabrics Expo several times, and hopefully we've been helpful in that. Yeah, if you could say, both of you then, maybe starting with you, Pedro, about these challenges and what you've done, because a lot of people in our audience probably would have similar issues.
Absolutely. So I think when you're a small business, we're a startup in the end, and we still don't have the big quantities to actually negotiate with suppliers at lower minimums. So we always struggle when it comes to kind of like getting our own color and getting some materials made to order or available for us because of our minimums. So I think that's the first point. Another point which is interesting, and I think that we are very interested in communicating how, in showcasing and showing our social media how those materials are developed. How does a recycled plastic bottle becomes, or how a bottle becomes a recycled nylon. And the companies that are doing this, they're doing very, very interesting projects, but they still don't understand the power of getting this material out and showing how they're doing it, because that's what they have of special is the process they're doing, the responsibility they have. So I think those materials as well is quite challenging. And I think that's when, in terms of like solution, I think that's what Tiffany is doing, and it's really, really powerful, is the idea of that you can combine minimum of certain materials with other brands. That normally happens many times when, I don't know, big brands from carrying have a big order with the supplier, and I'm interested in a similar material, and then I can get lower quantities because of the fact that this material is being produced. So what Tiffany is doing, it's something that I think it's really helpful in that sense. And do you have any other thing you feel, Camila, which you?
No, I think this combining volumes, I think is the best solution for now. Even at the fair last year, I was like in the line and I was hearing people saying we were waiting to speak to Tipa Corp. And I was really keen to buy from them, and then the minimum was huge. And then a lot of people in the line, we were speaking between ourselves, saying like, what if we combine minimums? What if we all buy together? And I think it's really clever what Tiffany is doing. It's really helpful for brands that are starting.
And when it comes to the fair, I think we were able to kind of like find amazing materials there. And it's always very exciting for me, that very interested in technology. To see the selection together. I also find it very inspiring that the way it's divided. So you have the groups of like the more like couture special materials, then you have like the organics, then you have the leather solutions. For instance, the jacket that Camila is wearing is made of apple leather.
Yes. Come a bit closer, Camila. We want to see it closer. Yeah. Okay. Very nice. Of course. Fru mats. Yeah.
And we found this fabric at the fair. And
nice.
Yeah. So it's made of is the waste of the apple from the food industry, from the juice industry. Yeah. That's mixed with polyurethane, and it's a quite interesting proposition for vegan leather that's less harmful to the environment.
Yeah. And I just saw that Tiffany has dropped out, but I guess she's dialing back in. She might have a connection problem. But what does it feel like to work actually with that material? Is it in any way different, or are there certain setbacks that you had to take into account when actually, making this jacket, or how does it sort of behave?
I think it's an ongoing process, understanding how to work with those materials, because of course this is not a leather. It's like it's a fake leather.
Yeah.
That happens to be more responsible. I think when it comes to finding the shape, the pattern will be similar, but then the machine will adjust and will work in a different way with this material, and requires a lot of testing. And I think the important thing, loads of those materials that are technological and they're quite new, and it requires a lot of testing to understand what is the impacts this will have in the future with wearability.
Right.
So definitely, I feel that those materials require a lot of research and trials.
Okay. And I think, Tiffany, are you back
Yes.
on?
Sorry, I'm
Okay,
back
great.
on. Just got my video off for more
Okay.
stability.
Sure. So Tiffany, so you just dropped off when we were talking about pooling the fabrics and how that, how you do that. Maybe you want to talk a little bit about that?
Sure. Actually, in fact, a little anecdote. The whole concept started when Camila actually shared with me her experience at the Expo. So that was actually the inspiration. And that kind of ties into one of the problem or the challenge that I find I want to highlight is the collaboration actually within this industry. As we all know, people in the fashion industry, there are just so many stakeholders involved, and every issue is actually interlinked. And unless we really come together and try to solve these problems together, we will never be able to reach the ideal solution fast enough, because the problem is just so big. So that's the first thing. And to some extent, I also agree with Pedro that I see how currently how the market works is a little bit disadvantaging the smaller or the new brands, simply because they're smaller, they're new, they don't have the access to the right suppliers as quickly. And that is one of the key goals that we're focusing on at TECHSTYLE, is to give equal access to brands of any kind, whether they are small or large or in the middle of transitioning towards more sustainable practice. We want to really help every brand in their journey to design sustainably.
Yeah.
The other thing I would highlight is also the challenge of changing behavior, whether it's from consumer changing their behavior to simply shop cheap and, buy when it breaks, or to suppliers and brands using more digital tools. And hopefully this will be one of the benefits that comes out of COVID, where people are now really adapting much faster to solutions that really work. And that's where we are also working really hard to get, especially on the supplier side, like creating something like crowdsourcing, aggregating orders. It does require changing some of the backend systems, some of the ordering and even the design and sourcing process. So there again, it really requires everyone to come together and to say, hey, we have a common problem and we need to work together to solve them.
Actually, maybe this is the point also to give a shout out to a company called Lebenskleidung, which has been pooling orders already. I think it's about 5 or 6 years ago. And so sometimes it's on their website and sometimes it's not. So they make their own fabric. So that could also be something. And of course, on our own Future Fabrics Virtual Expo, there is a whole button just for small order quantities. So it's very easy to immediately go onto that. And then you can see everyone who's sort of supplying. I think that we even have some by the meter. But it is definitely a big problem, and we have it every time at the Expo. It's just some of them take small orders, but it's true that a lot of the big ones, especially sort of tech fabrics and innovative fabrics, initially have higher minimum orders. But I would say at this point, this is not something that is particularly or unique to sustainable materials. Any designer really struggles very often with getting to the right quantity for the minimum order. So that's definitely something to mention here. So then can I ask something about the actual digital sourcing? So Pedro, you're clearly one of the younger designers around who is already with such a career behind. How did you always source easily on digital platforms, or was there also a moment where you just had to learn how to do this and get used to that?
I think that the interesting thing about sourcing digitally is when it comes to those kind of very unique materials, they are something special. So first of all, you're interested in the concept. more than just how it looks. And of course, afterwards, when you receive a swatch, you're going to understand the look and you're going to see if it works. But I think today, and that's why for me, for instance, in the past, I used to go to Première Vision, and that's a huge fair, and I was always struggling to find responsible and more sustainable materials. And then when I go to your fair, it's like a different experience, because it's about like a selection of materials that has the criterias that are necessary to achieve what I need. So I think it's becoming more and more easy for us to source digitally, because we're looking for specific materials, and from that we can make the decisions.
Yeah. Tiffany, do you, in your experience, are the bigger brands or more established brands finding it particularly difficult to source digitally, or is everyone kind of familiar with this now, would you say?
I would say actually across the board, no one is that advanced yet. For sure, the large brands like Adidas, they have their own internal system. And what we see is they actually encourage, or should I say, basically the suppliers that want to work with them need to use their system. So in the end, you see 20 large players with 20 different systems, and supplier in the end end up wasting a lot of their time just integrating different systems. And then, I mean, the other downside of that is, of course, there is no then consistency in the supply chain, right? So, and with a smaller designer, actually, interestingly, they actually adopt to a digital format much quicker, because whether they're smaller or they're just more agile, they can actually change a lot of their processes a lot more easily. Whereas the larger one, they say, well, it doesn't really fit into my data management, so it's going to take months or years before we can even think about using something like this.
What about other ways of working digitally, Pedro, in your design process? Are you seem to be quite, I mean, from the video that we've seen, you're very comfortable with that.
Yeah, so in the past years, when I was a teenager, I started learning Photoshop on my own. So I started being able to kind of like manipulate images digitally. So through time, I developed this creative process that I developed like this Frankenstein model that's a mixture of many models. And on top of this model, I come with like sketches and also like pictures of moulage and experiments that I do. I layer them and I start creating the look. So the whole idea is to reduce waste and reduce time, is for you to be able to have a very, very clear idea of how things will look before they're ready, and to have an idea of how the collection will look, how merchandising would work, also the price point in the price architecture of the collection. It's a very specific method, and I think even the buyers and the industry inside was always a bit like reluctant to this method. But after COVID, I feel now there is much less resistance. Yeah. And we're even considering, we are understanding how we can also make our kind of prototype digitally, instead of like having like real samples, kind of like having the collection sketch digitally, and then the buyers, they can place the order from there. So this is, I think, is a process, and I think things might go in this direction. For me, it makes more sense, because I think also when you want to do a presentation or a show, you're launching the collection that's going to be available in the store very, very soon. So you don't also have this huge gap between when you present and when it's out. And also it makes sense, because then you can control better the narrative of when you launch things, and also the drops, not the drops, but like the different seasons, delivers in the season.
Okay. And when you were working for the Italian brand before, were you already working like that as well? Was that already, no?
La Perla is, of course, a heritage brand. Is like heritage in underwear. They have an incredible know-how, but of course, it's like a very old company, and it has and has the structure and the process of the old world. So everything is done in the factory. Like there is a huge structure for sampling, etc. So the digital sketch was happening at the time of La Perla, but also at La Perla, it's then when I started to question myself a lot about the background of materials, etc.
Right. Okay. So was this one of the reasons why you actually wanted to establish your own brand, right? To really be independent and just follow in that sort of the concept of being a more sustainable brand? I mean, it sounds very much like it, but was it from the outset right there?
I think it's both from this both outset. I like the idea of coming with a brand that's a lifestyle brand that's based in future-proof habits. And I think an old brand carries a lot of weight from the past and amazing things. And I think there is space for different types of projects. But I think you should kind of create a radical kind of like move towards a more responsible mindset and consuming and also producing. I think it requires something to come as a silver canvas that you can reflect the time and do something that's very holistic and complete.
Tiffany, can you hear us again?
Yep. Yeah.
Okay. What's the response you're getting when you're engaging with brands in terms of digital work and how this has changed with COVID-19? What have you come across?
Certainly with both brands and suppliers, people are becoming much more receptive, and they're also starting to really see the potential of really the future for sourcing and really achieving end-to-end traceability of a product. Now we're at this sort of the stage where you can actually identify fabric by level and look at their sustainability impact, their environmental impact. But the next step would be, let's say, measuring the energy intensity of a factory, really tracing where the cotton comes from, tracing the carbon footprint of the distance that it's traveled. All of this will really hugely support the brands as they try to also communicate, how sustainable their product is. But of course, in the back end, you need a tech or digital platform that can provide this traceability ability. So I think now, especially on the supplier side, people are starting to see the potential, and what we hope to bring this kind of information to the brands as early as possible.
Yeah, that's certainly what we've noticed too with our suppliers. There's a huge shift now taking place where people are just forced to work much more digitally, and it's a real leap.
One more thing is also people start to realize in the old habit where you just go to your consistent supplier and you have no idea what's happening elsewhere, and all of a sudden COVID hits and you need a plan B, but you don't have any plan B because you don't have visibility. So people realize to also increase their flexibility, they need to start to, become a little bit more digital. And that's one way to help them actually adapt to different kind of situation.
Absolutely. It's interesting to see how the trade fairs in September and some of the fashion shows are going ahead, or so have been announced until now. How are you going to present your fashion shows, Pedro? Are you going to be having only a digital presentation, or what are your plans?
So for the new season, we are not going to present press-wise, but it's going to be more focused on the wholesale and actually launching the collection digitally. The idea is to transfer the kind of like direct to the consumer and to press around either January or March during Fashion Week at this time. But obviously, we don't know yet, probably it will be also something digital. I think what is important to think, in my opinion, is that we still don't know what's going to be the outcome of COVID in the world. We don't know if we're going to have a second lockdown. So I think it's quite powerful, the idea that we are in a time that we cannot plan that much further. And we need to kind of like take one decision at a time, which I think it makes things more solid.
Yeah. And yet, I mean, that's kind of easier said than done, isn't it? I mean, how are you planning? Are you having any kind of timelines as you used to, or you just literally just said, I'm going to take it week by week?
I think the timeline's still there. I think it's a whole machine that works in a certain way, and it's
also
really
because the business is wholesale driven right now. We are moving towards more digital, direct to consumer.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so of course, like the wholesale works in a specific way, and I think it's going to take a little while for this to adjust. But I think a perception we had this week in some conversations is that it's going to become more less seasonal, and the collections, they will remain for longer in the store.
Yeah.
Of course, I think still the wholesalers, they want to have they want to promote some news, and this is still going to be this side of it's going to still be there.
Tiffany, do you want to add anything here from what you've sort of heard from other brands that you're working with, or?
I think Pedro summarized pretty well. My guess is, especially with the uncertainty of COVID, you would just see the move to digitization just accelerate. And hopefully that will also help the entire industry to move towards models that are much more efficient, with less waste, much more agile.
Yeah. If we go back a little bit again to more sort of fabrics and these things, have you got any favorites that you've come across recently during the time of COVID? Maybe you had a bit more time to source or to, you know, delve in. Also with Camila, maybe you had, you know, nobody had to travel. And so, you know, have you found anything new that was gripping and you thought, I'm going to do my next collection with this? Or
I think my
anything
biggest,
you can share?
the biggest surprises I had this year was during the fair in January. So
Nice.
yeah.
Because we are still receiving the swatches.
Yeah, because of the lockdown, some of the swatches didn't arrive, so we still received them. So this week we got the cactus, and I remember in my mind, and I find it really, really interesting, and I like how radical this is. And also sometimes I think the issue with kind of like polyurethane mixed with a natural material, with a natural resource like apple or like cactus, is that the back sometimes it's a bit sticky. And they have a back that's made of cotton, which it makes much more comfortable. So this is interesting, and I'm obsessed with the leaf leather.
Oh, good. That's of course Brazilian, so that resonates with you very much, I'm sure.
It does have a concept that I love. That's the idea of like a tropical sci-fi. I like the idea that it looks like a snake, or it looks like a kind of a natural animal that you would have to kill. But also not, but it's actually a natural resource, but you're not killing an animal to do, but it's also not fake. It is what it is the look of it, which I find it interesting.
Yeah, it's actually, let's give them a shout out. It's Nova Cairo, and it's called elephant ear plant from the Amazon. Yeah, and it comes in different colors. But have you done any prototypes yet? How does it behave?
We're in conversation with them. Camila got.
Yeah, they are just, they have just developed like a new feature. So we are waiting for the new swatch. They said in August, more or less, will be ready.
Because that is, of course, a true vegan alternative. Because very often, you know, one of the problems with, as much as we at the Expo like materials that are, you know, the cactus or the apple leather or whatever, it still has a high content of polyurethane. And so, of course, you know, that comes with a set of problems. So that's why it's nice to hear that you're already working with the elephant ear plant, because that is, of course, it's 100% plant-based. Tiffany, anything that you have recently discovered that you're excited about during this time of COVID?
Yes, one of the new supplier called Montero, which I believe is talking tomorrow. Yeah, exactly. They're doing 100% recycled, upcycled silk. And I just also received the swatch, which actually has a woolen touch. So it's like, depending on which style,
it's beautiful.
It's very, very beautiful. And so this for me is like extremely innovative. Of course, on the other side, if you look at more synthetic, we all know in the end synthetic material typically can only be recycled once, and it doesn't in the end disintegrate. But now we're starting to see new technology come up for biodegradable nylon or bio-based or biodegradable polyester, which I'm hearing they are much more stable and good performance, because in the end, there is still a huge percentage of synthetic material being used. So I'm really dying for technology to be ripe enough so we can use these truly biodegradable synthetics.
Yeah. Well, I would say maybe if the lovely colleagues could share in the chat at what time the talk is with Montero tomorrow. But also I'd like to say that, of course, when we talk about biodegradability of the materials you've just mentioned, Tiffany, of course, the audience needs to understand that those are usually controlled industrial biodegradable systems. So it's not like you can just put them on the back of your compost heap and hope that, you know, in 6 weeks time it goes and returns back to the earth. It's not that that way it's biodegradable, but it's under controlled conditions, water and temperature controlled. That's of course what we mean for these materials. We're going to open soon to the Q&A because there's a few questions that have been coming in, and I'll hand over to Janet to collate them and bring them up. But is there anything that both of you would like to still add that we haven't touched on yet in the next few minutes?
No, I think that's all.
I think that's all. Yeah.
Okay, Tiffany?
Maybe there's something, yeah, that just came up in my mind. I think that there is, I think what is very important, I think when as creatives are in the industry is thinking about this decision-making in terms of materials, is to understand that's not only about the background of the material, but also kind of like what you do with it and how appealing this product is and what's going to be the life cycle of this material, of this product. And I think this is quite important because I think the work that needs to be done now is to break the stigma of sustainability being unsexy and to push more and more in making this idea natural as a habit, not as something just like something that is like a weird organic looking thing, but something that can become like a complete lifestyle.
You still think that's a problem, yeah? That there is still that stigma attached to sustainability and environmentally friendly, which is of course exactly what we've encountered for the longest time when we started. But our sense was that for the last 2 expos that really started to be, you know, easing out. But what's your perception, Tiffany, on that?
I would echo a little bit of what Pedro said. I think it's really important as designers design their collections to recognize that, you know, the technology for fabric, for material are constantly evolving, and none of them, if you ask me which one is the most sustainable, actually this is such a tough question because different categories have different strengths and weaknesses. I think the key is to really dig deep as a designer to really understand, and of course whatever you choose has to be in line with your design aesthetic. So yeah, that's what I would put, like, to say actually in the end it's about inquiring and digging deeper. And I really hope as well, because, you know, in the back, I think Pedro pointed out a very good point earlier, that a lot of suppliers are doing a great job, but they don't understand the power of communicating this to designer and even to end consumer. And then there is a bit of a break, and we really rely here on the designer to do this communication part, you know. Once I'm sure, once consumer realize about the impact and how cool some of these materials are, the stigma will be broken.
Yeah, and so that before we go to the Q&A, if I can ask one last question to Pedro actually on that. I just looked at my notes and I saw that you were saying that on the labels you always describe the material, and on that, how difficult do you find that to you know, because very often sustainability is quite long-winded and there's a lot of nuances in the materials, and there is no 100% sustainable fabric. And so how do you put that and summarize that in an inspiring way, an informative way, without dumbing it down and you know, and fit all of that on a small label? How do you do that, and how challenging do you find that?
I think it's about like bringing down to the essential. So for us, it's very important always to have the certification that's coming with this, and a quick, a little superficial overview of the impacts, or overview of what this material is made of. And in our website, if you go in the product, then you have more description. Right. But we're slowly in our digital strategy. We are going in a direction we're going to voice more our perspective about different materials and also our point of view on it, because I think it's important to share. But also I believe that the consumer as well has also power and has also their own needs. So for instance, you can discuss about organic certified leather that has no chemical in the process and no deforestation, And and that works, and there's low impact in that one. But then suddenly this is part of a huge conversation about the cattle industry. And then when you come to the ones that are mixed with synthetic, even the apple leather, you have like the issue that you're using a resource like oil and polyurethane. So I think these conversations, they need to be shared more, and this needs to be shared more with the consumer, so the consumer can make their decision, and also what feels right for them.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, so one last thing then, as a statement, perhaps more than a question, Pedro, about your brand being called the future-proof brand. If you maybe want to say just a bit about that, because we're finishing, and so we're kind of an outlook to the future. If you want to say why and how, what the meaning is really.
So this was a process that it took us a long time of discussion to understand what would be a wording to describe. I feel very unattractive brands that are doing very little, and they are using a lot of the word sustainability. So for me, I find a bit turn off when I see someone that doesn't do lots using the word. And we didn't want to use this word because also is an ongoing process. But I do like the idea of a future-proof mindset and a future-proof philosophy of life, which means you're predicting where you can cause stress in the future, and you're trying to make sure you block this to happen. The future stress in the planet, in the society, etc. In terms of also future-proof, I like the idea because I'm very interested in sci-fi and technology. So I always had a very futuristic look in my design. So it was also a way to bring those two elements, this kind of futuristic look and kind of like modern look in fashion, in clothes and design, but also with the responsibility towards nature and the understanding the world as one only thing and the impact each one has in the whole system.
Nicely put. Thank you. Tiffany, anything you'd like to add?
I think what Pedro said is pretty hard to top. Let's look forward to the question.
Okay, good. Janet, are you coming in here by yourself, or do I need to do anything? I think we're going to see Janet's appearing now. Oh, hi there, Janet. Okay, very good. So what happened in the chat and the Q&A since we've been having our conversation?
Yeah, lots of questions going on about just sourcing the materials that Pedro was talking about. I'm very interested in what you've found. So yeah, just got a couple of questions. One of them is, do you foresee that consumers would have a digital avatar version app on their smartphone so they can try a label's digital clothes to see how it would look on anytime soon? Do you think that's kind of a future, long-term, short-term, something that you would employ? Yeah.
Oh, sure. I think it's already happening. I remember I did once a collaboration with Nike, and I went to Portland, and it was a women's wear training collection. I did in collaboration with them. And my first visit was to understand in which area of the company this collaboration would happen. And I saw this kind of 3D machine that scanned my body and got like all my proportions. So the team could work in sketches in my body if they wanted. And this technology was available 6-7 years ago already. And I think it's getting closer and closer. I think also with COVID, I think this shift is gonna happen much quicker. I think loads of areas of the industry that was a bit doing things in an old way and was not open to a new approach is understanding that that's the only way forward today. So I think in the next decade, we're going to see a lot of interesting things happening.
Yeah, definitely, for sure. And then this is to anyone who knows it really, but do you know of any recycling facilities that are looking at recycling biodegradable synthetics that require the controlled decomposing environment? Has anyone heard of?
I can jump on this one. Yes, I would say, well, generally speaking, the synthetic material suppliers are largely based in Asia. And you see the biggest one, they're also vertically integrated. So they're also chemical company, and they're even building testing facilities in the States where they really doing like 5-year-long testing because they have to put in the material, wait for 5 years and see what happens. So it is it's definitely happening with the larger players, and they do the whole chain, R&D and testing.
Thank you. Any others?
Yeah, so it's along the same vein is there any worry that the industrial compost infrastructure will not catch up with the new materials being offered? Again, I think we need Tiffany for this one, but she might have dropped.
I think actually the development process is the reverse. So like when we talk about industrial, it's not even incineration. It's how they test it is they test under the condition of what happens when you dump rubbish, you know. So based on that kind of condition, they are working backwards to say, okay, what kind of material can we develop that would disintegrate in that condition? So, well, as far as from what I've heard, I haven't heard anything along these lines to say we might come across bottleneck to deal with the new material technology that might need other treatment. But you never know, right? I mean, nowadays there are so many really, really innovative material, but you don't really know the secondary effect until, you know, a little bit later on.
But I would also say, you know, it's very often a case that the systems are limping behind the innovations. That's just one of the things that unfortunately is just not quite, everything's not quite aligned yet. But I don't think that means that it should stop us at all, even though, yes, you know, if somebody, a customer of Pedro wants to dispose of the Frumat jacket that Camila is wearing, you know, that's going to be a little bit tricky to recycle, but that shouldn't mean that we shouldn't, you know, push forward with experimenting with new materials and developing them further and make them evolve into the even more sustainable version of what they are now.
Yes, and I think there's also a component there that when the design is strong and kind of you spend time getting the pattern and the shape right, and there's a certain level of harmony there. Of course, this is very subjective, but I think like when the design is strong and bold, I think it can last longer. So I think that's where for the designer it comes its responsibility, how to make this last long in terms of like design.
And this is just what we heard this morning in the presentation with Ellen MacArthur Foundation, is of course one of the most important, or they listed it as the important criteria, is actually the designing for durability, of course. And the whole, if you're looking at it from a circular system.
Yeah, in that sense, actually, this question kind of fits in to both of you again. What are your opinions on the future of recycled polyesters or recycled nylons? Do you consider them to be a good answer to sustainability?
You wanna go for it?
I think it can be a very good option if you think about virgin nylon or virgin polyester, because the amount of energy that you spend is less if you recycle than to produce a virgin material. So in my opinion, I think it's more sustainable. It might not be the one, of course, it's not 100% sustainable, but I think it's more sustainable than producing the virgin material.
I think we should also say here that, I mean, that's one of the things we always put at the Future Fabrics Expo, the 9 to define. These are sort of our 9 principles that we put out at the last Expo. I think they're on our website. Is that, you know, it's the property of the material. So you're really designing something where the property of the material is the right one for that particular outfit. And in terms of recycled polyester, of course, one of the big downsides is that it's shedding microfibers. But if you're using it only for outerwear or any garments that are for outdoors, then you're kind of, you know, you're avoiding that problem. And therefore anything that you're wearing on your skin over and over again that might require often to be laundered should just not have any polyester in it, even if it's recycled, because of the microfibers, until the laundry machine's having the filter involved and you have a filter.
There is a bag for that.
I know, yeah, the guppy bag.
Guppy
it's
bag.
called the guppy bag. But yeah, I don't know if you ever had the guppy bag. I have it and I've done it many times. And you know, again, I think it's a good medium. I mean, it helps. It's a good tool. And yet even that will come out to have better versions and stronger and this and that. But yeah, that you could do that. But, you know, until you tell everybody to use a guppy bag, it's, yeah, we're trying to talk about properties of the material in that sense, from a design perspective.
Yeah,
Tiffany?
I think that's very nicely summarized. My opinion is kind of like a combination of what you said, but I think, you know, if we just talk about recycled nylon and polyester, it's probably the best option for now. But for me, this is only intermediary. It's already much better than virgin, but as said before, when it's recycled nylon, after, like, let's say it's close to your breakdown, after it does break down, recycled synthetic does not disintegrate. And even when you recycle it, then the quality, you can only recycle it once. The second time, third time, then the quality is not good enough to make into clothes. Maybe some lower value good is okay. So I think really the long term is to figure out the biodegradable or bio-based synthetic. That would, for me, would be the long-term solution that one should work towards.
Any others? We're coming close to finishing.
Yeah, final question I think would be good. It would be good to hear from both of you again, because the question was, what's the best way or place to learn about sustainability in textiles, where you can get the most complete picture. So I don't want to be biased here, but obviously we provide a lot of resources, but it would be good to know about your journey of how you found out about sustainability and where you go to do research for your resources for, you know, Tiffany, Pedro, Camila, like, where do you go search for answers?
I think it's all about being curious of what you want. So like we are in the fair and then we speak to suppliers and then it leads to another supplier and then I see an article and then one thing like takes me to the other. It's just about like having the need to look and search for new materials and yeah.
Absolutely, and also understanding that that might not be available at the point you need or you want, but in the future will be available. And it's also about like finding a solution for this period in between.
Of course, transition, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
Tiffany?
Well, of course, we're the partner of Sustainable Angle, so we're a little bit biased there, but I really agree on the point of being curious and really learning, because even for me, the best way I learn is actually talking to the suppliers themselves. And so I think it's really like digging deeper and not just taking facts for granted.
Yeah.
That would be the best way.
Yeah, I also agree when you speak to suppliers, if they are a bit cagey about giving you answers, you know that they're hiding something. The ones who are more transparent, you know you can trust them, and that's one of the things we do a lot in our organization. When we accept fabrics, we do drill down on our criteria and whether they fit within our criteria, and we ask those questions, and whether they come back with us with the certifications, with the actual answers, whether they're open to answering our questions. That gives you a real clue about how transparent and how much their vision for sustainability is part of their goal is, and not just for profit.
At this stage, we've just shared in the chat the link to the recent masterclass series that we've put out, which is broken down for each fiber category and in what way they are, what does sustainability mean for each of those fiber categories and sort of best case and best practice. And also in terms of chemistry, we have next week an actual session with Scott Eccles from Roadmap to Zero. And so anybody in the audience who's keen to find out more about chemicals and all that side of the materials, which is very often difficult to find out from the supplier itself, please tune in for that one. Maybe we can share that in the chat, the exact date. I don't want to say anything wrong, but it's definitely next week. But thank you both, all three of you, to having joined us and sharing your thoughts and insights. And here, Tiffany's again now. Are you higher now? Have you been walking up?
No, same place.
But thanks to all three of you for joining. Thank you, Janet. And we'll look out for more to come.
One more thing?
Yes.
Sorry, just so obviously our Future Fabrics Virtual Expo is free for the week, where you just sign up or you log in as a free member. Everything's available now, so you don't need to, there's no paywall. You don't need to do anything else. You can see all the fabrics are available now. So just in case there is a misunderstanding. Yeah.
Okay, brilliant. Thank you all very much. Have a good afternoon.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you. Take care. Bye-bye.
Thanks. Bye.